Shin is a good-for-nothing pathetic loser who gets stuck inside a game. With no regard for his family, Shin decides to start a new life inside the game as he comes across his old comrade and meets some new people as well. The New Gate is the most advanced MMORPG created using state-of-the-art technology. Players can roam around freely in this world with their favorite characters, defeat powerful monsters, and even make a huge fortune using trading. However, one day, this exciting MMORPG turns into a death game as the players get trapped inside it as they cannot log out, and death inside the game means death in the real world as well. Realizing that the other players are just as useless as Sakura, a wannabe Kirito named Shin steps up and decides to clear the game on his own. He eventually confronts the final boss, and following an intense battle, Shin manages to defeat it. He acquires some crazy titles including the Transcended, the Accomplished, and the Liberator. With this, the players can now log out and leave the game. Before leaving himself, Shin decides to wait till all the other players leave. After all the other players leave, Shin attempts to log out as well, as suddenly, a mysterious light appears out of nowhere, and Shin gets unconscious. Upon waking up, he realizes that he is still inside the game, and for some reason, it feels way too realistic. He also notices that his stats have boosted a lot, which makes sense since he defeated the last boss. He then attempts to log out once again, only to notice that the logout option is gone. This makes him realize that even without the truck-kun, he is trapped inside the game, and with no other option left, he decides to venture back to his home in the game. On his way, he comes across a massive town which shocks him. As soon as he reaches home, he witnesses some random losers threatening an elf to reveal the location of her master. The elf ignores them, just like my crush ignores me, but the thugs force her outside the barrier. As soon as they get outside the barrier, a random monster attacks them and the thugs piss their pants. Being a Sigma male, Shin appears out of nowhere and saves her sorry. The elf then takes him to the Moon Sanctum and introduces herself as Tierra. She questions if he's an acquaintance of her master, as Shin inquires the identity of her master while glaring at her massive melons. Tierra reveals that her master is Schnee Razor, as Shin remembers that Schnee was one of the random NPCs he didn't give a shit about. Hearing all this, Shin wants to meet Schnee, but Tierra refuses, stating that she cannot allow a random nobody to meet her master. Following all this, Shin gets some important information regarding this world as Tierra tells him that Shin's race, High Humans, went extinct around 500 years ago during the sunset on Prosperity. Shin immediately realizes that this sunset whatever must be when he defeats the final boss. In return for his information, Shin grants her a golden gale while ogling at her melons. He also addresses her as a beautiful elf, which shocks her because she knows she's ugly as f***. She further reveals that an elf with black hair is a cursed sign of ill fortune. She further tells him that her black hair brings forth disaster and attracts monsters, and are the reason she was exiled from her village. Schnee was the one who saved her and cast this barrier around the shop. Within this barrier, Tierra is completely safe, and Schnee even altered her appearance using illusion magic, so people won't despise her. Hearing all this, Shin remembers something and utilizes the skill Analyze to appraise this curse. It is revealed that this curse is actually named the Cursed Gift, and he can even remove this curse. With this, he purifies Tierra off this curse, and some of her hair returns back to being silver. This makes her insanely happy, but she is still not sure if she can venture outside. Shin then forcefully takes her outside and reassures her that he'll defeat any monsters coming their way. He then takes her to a mountain where Tierra starts crying, stating that she had forgotten how vast the sky actually is. At this point, my man Shin has successfully managed to rizz up an elf. After this, they return back as Tierra questions Shin about his future activities. He reveals that he plans to travel around different towns. He wants to know more about this world and wonders if other support characters are also alive. Hearing this, Tierra grants him a letter of introduction that would allow him to pass any town checkpoint without any trouble. With this, Shin reaches the nearby town, where a random NPC escorts him to the guild. On their way, the guard reveals that Shin can even get an audience with the king using this letter, even though Shin didn't ask him. Upon reaching the guild, Shin registers himself as an adventurer, but it'll take at least a day until the guild card is finished. Just then, a woman named Celica serves him food and starts staring towards him as Shin eats. This makes him uncomfortable, and he questions the reason behind her awkward gaze. Celica tells him that they want to confirm the authenticity of his letter in another room where Shin meets the Guildmaster Barlux. The Guildmaster confirms the identity of Shin's letter, using his own letter as both of them start glowing when placed next to each other. He further informs him about the perks of this fascinating letter, which makes Shin realize that Schnee must have gotten insanely popular. The following morning, Shin gets his guild card, and he also takes up a job regarding some hilkweed collection. During this job, Shin accidentally comes across a monster named Skullface Jack. To test his strength, he decides to take on the monster. During their battle, he notices that the undead is wielding a holy sword, which is quite weird. Despite this, Shin manages to beat the monster rather easily as he unleashes his true potential. The holy sword gets lost in the process and somehow ends up in the royal castle. With this, Shin now knows the extent of his power in this new world and is quite excited about it. The knights are quite concerned about the sword that made its way into the castle, as the princess instructs them to determine its composition. They are sure that the one who hurled the sword this far is overwhelmingly strong. Meanwhile, Shin notices some people gathered around injured knights in the town. He questions a random NPC about them as he reveals that they were ambushed by the Skullface, and only 4 of them survived. He further tells him about a sword that made its way into the castle and asks if Shin knows something about it. My man Shin doesn't give a shit about this and plays dumb and decides to report everything to the guild. This shocks Celica as she further questions him regarding this. Just then, another woman appears at the spot only to be surprised by Shin's endeavors. Shin even comments that the Skullface's equipment wasn't that special, so he didn't loot it. With no other option left, they decide to appraise the gem brought by Shin. During their conversation, Shin further reveals that the Skullface Jack's level was around 300, and was probably a unique specimen. Hearing this, Celica hurries to get the crystal appraised to determine the monster's level and confirm Shin's statement. According to them, if Shin has managed to defeat a level 359 Skullface Jack, then he's probably stronger than a useless A-rank party. Following all this, Shin decides to have lunch and urges them to keep his strength a secret. At the restaurant, the waitress asks Shin if he would mind sharing a table with someone, to which he replies negatively. Just then, a weird guy appears at the restaurant and sits beside Shin. Shin immediately recognizes his weapon as the mystical spear, Venom, which is recognized as a legendary weapon. After Shin introduces himself, the guy also introduces himself as Wilhelm Avis, who questions if Shin is a rookie adventurer. After Shin tells him that he started 3 days ago, the guy gets shocked and comments on his equipment, stating that it is better than the lot. Wilhelm then tells him that people fear him because he is always hunting undead. Shin, however, is completely unbothered by his presence and even calls him dumb. Wilhelm further reveals the ability of his spear as Drain. According to him, this ability drains the life force of his enemies and transfers it to him. The following day, Shin decides to research the history of this world and reaches a library for the first time in his entire life. He comes across some information regarding the vanishing incident and deduces that it must be owing to all the players logging out simultaneously. Meanwhile, the leader of the guild is having a meeting with some knights from the castle. The guild has confirmed that the Skullface Jack was indeed level 359, which makes him king class. They are also shocked at the fact that Shin left the equipment behind. The castle wants to learn more about the guy who defeated the monster, but the guild refuses to reveal Shin's identity. The knights believe that the random sword flying into the castle is somehow related to Shin defeating the Skullface Jack. With all of this going on, Shin realizes that gathering information is quite tough as he notices a girl staring towards him. Realizing that she must be hungry, he offers her some food, which she readily accepts. The girl introduces herself as Millie and deems Shin a good person. Just then, Wilhelm appears at the spot, and the girl immediately recognizes him. This makes Shin wonder if they're related. Wilhelm clears the misunderstanding by stating that Millie is an orphan and is an expert at running away, so he's always looking out for her. Before they head back, Millie asks Shin to save some fox in the northern forest, which shocks him. With no other option left, he decides to check out the forest. The following day, he heads towards the Moon Sanctum, where he meets Tierra and hands over some magic items she can use to communicate with him whenever Schnee returns. The reason he cannot use it to communicate with Schnee directly is because they are not acquaintances in this world. He also hands over a sword named the Blue Moon that only Schnee and Shin himself can wield. Following this, Shin heads into the forest and notices a barrier telling him to get the hell out of this forest. Despite this, he ventures further into the forest and comes across a shrine. As soon as he enters the shrine, he hears something crack, but avoids it and heads inside, where he comes across a fox. Realizing that the fox is poisoned and cursed, he utilizes his abilities to heal it. Suddenly, he notices some monsters approaching him and realizes that the cracking sound must be the barrier tearing apart. Much to his surprise, hundreds of undeads are gathered outside the shrine, and with no other option left, Shin beats the living out of them. Just when he thinks that everything is over, the fox statues guarding the shrine turn into monsters and ambush him. He attempts to subjugate them using Shadow Bing, but the monsters free themselves by surrounding the entire area with black smoke and hindering Shin's vision. Now that he cannot visualize them, the monsters take full advantage of this and keep attacking Shin. The fox, however, guides Shin towards a magic circle that allows him to see the monsters despite all this smoke. Seizing the opportunity, Shin absolutely folds the monsters and ends it all. With all of this over now, Shin appraises the fox and realizes that it is actually an elemental, the highest tier monster in the new gate. The fox has also taken a liking to Shin, who wants to meet Millie again. Meanwhile, Schnee receives a message from Tiara telling her about Shin and is quite excited about meeting him. Okay, OG Voice Sama, I'm gonna need you to take over. Later, fellow otakus.
As they are heading back, Shin decides to keep the fox being an elemental a secret to avoid any chaos. For this purpose, he decides to formulate a contract with it and even names it Yuzuha, who gets way too excited over this. Just then, Shin receives some messages from Tiara, who informs him that she managed to contact Schnee using the magic tool and succeeded. With this, they decide to head towards the guild and report everything to them. Seeing Shin, Celica and her sister start fighting over who will take the report from him, since they are certified simps. In the end, it is decided that Celica will take the report, which is a massive achievement for her. After this, Shin takes a look at some quests and comes across a plea from the church, requesting for a particular skill holder. Since he is curious about Millie's ability, he decides to accept this quest and heads towards the church. Upon reaching the church, he comes across a woman and introduces himself. He also inquires about Millie, which raises some suspicions. But after Millie recognizes him, the woman concludes that Shin is not a dangerous person. The woman then introduces herself as Tria from the church. Shin then questions Millie regarding the fox, asking if Yuzuha is the one she wanted him to save. Following all these formal introductions, Tria reveals that they are looking for a particular skill holder with the skill Purify. Upon hearing this, Shin immediately accepts the quest and demands information regarding the world instead of gold or coins. Hearing this, Tria wonders if sharing information with a complete stranger would be fine, but Millie reassures her that everything would be fine. A grown-ass woman trusting a kid's word for a sketchy guy she has never met? I mean, that's how it's supposed to go, right? Anyways, Tria then reveals that Millie's ability is known as Oracle, that allows her to visualize the future, further commenting that her prophecies have never been wrong. Considering all this, the church does not reveal Millie's ability to the outside world, fearing that unscrupulous people might come after her. She further tells him that adventurers like Wilhelm cooperate with them, and since he is feared by people, no one dares touch the kids. With this, Shin and Yuzuha play with the kids. One of the kids tells him that the person destined to become this church's priest is utter trash and wants the orphanage to be destroyed, and they'll have nowhere to go. For this reason, they want Rashira to acquire the Purify skill so she can inherit the church and save the orphanage. The kids get way too comfortable with Shin to the point that they sleep in his lap, which turns him on. Following this, Sister Rashira introduces herself to Shin as Tria reassures him that even though she is quite dumb, she's a hard worker, unlike you guys who are procrastinating while watching this video. Before moving forward, Shin questions them regarding the spawning point of high-level undead monsters as Sister Tria informs him that they usually spawn near the spirit planes. Just then, Willem appears out of nowhere and questions Shin regarding his real motive. Sister Tria reassures him that Shin doesn't seem like a bad guy, and things calm down. With this, Shin reveals that they need the Holy Bangle of Prayer to acquire the Purify skill and defeat 200 undead of level 150 and above. He further explains that he will weaken the monsters and Rashia will deal the finishing blow. Wilhelm and the others cannot comprehend this and get insanely shocked. Shin proceeds to explain that acquiring the bangle is the difficult part, but he already possesses one and will give it to Rashia. Hearing all this, Wilhelm volunteers to accompany them, and with this, the three of them decide to head towards the spirit planes. Wilhelm is quite surprised over the fact that Shin is a newbie adventurer and believes that he's a chosen one. He even confronts him regarding this topic, but much to his surprise, Shin has no idea what he's talking about. Wilhelm explains that chosen ones are people with unknown knowledge and are said to possess overwhelming abilities. Shin realizes that his abilities and skills are actually quite remarkable, and Wilhelm is not at fault for believing that he's a chosen one. During this conversation, Shin receives a message from Tiara informing him about Schnee's return to the kingdom. It is also revealed that Wilhelm also possesses the letter of recommendation from the Moon Sanctum. The following day, they reach the spirit planes where Shin hands over the bangle to Rashia, and with this, the quest begins. They immediately come across some undeads and Shin neutralizes them rather easily. He leaves them alive so that Rashia can kill them using her heal. The monsters keep spawning as Wilhelm and Shin keep taking them down. They eventually reach a barrier, and according to Wilhelm, This barrier is set by the guild to prevent high-level monsters from leaving the forest. Despite the enhanced difficulty, Shin and Wilhelm have no trouble dealing with these monsters as they help Rashia acquire the Purify skill. Meanwhile, the princess and some knights are up against a skull-faced Jack and get rid of it rather quickly. The princess, however, is concerned about the other party as a mysterious person volunteers to help them. That person gets rid of the skull-faced Jack with ease and saves their sorry. The knights also recognize her as Lady Schnee and are overjoyed. After saving their sorry ass, Schnee heals the knights with her magic. The knights inform her that the undeads have been escaping from the spirit planes even though they are not supposed to. They acknowledge the fact that Schnee is crazy strong, and it makes sense since she serves beside a high human. After getting further info regarding the undeads, Schnee leaves the useless knights behind and begins searching for Shin. Meanwhile, Willem is up against an ugly creature and manages to defeat it rather swiftly, as he then instructs Rashia to finish it off. Just as she kills the monster, a mysterious light surrounds her which scares the living shit out of Will, but Shin reassures them that it is just a status effect. With this, Rashia has now acquired the Purify skill and they can now head back. As they are about to leave, Shin notices something strange, and it turns out that the magic essence of all the monsters is gathering at one place and transforms into a massive level 804 Skull-Faced Lord. The monster immediately gets rid of the barrier protecting the town and focuses its attention towards Shin. With no other option left, they take to their toes with the monster following them. Suddenly, hundreds of undeads also appear at the spot as Will suggests that they should break through and escape. However, being the goody two-shoes he is, Shin instructs Will to take Rashia and leaves as he releases his limiter. With this, he has now unleashed his full potential. Realizing that Will is just as useless as he looks, he even grants him a physical buff. With his abilities, he breaks through the undead and allows them to escape. Shin also wanted Yazuha to escape alongside them, but the clingy fox insisted on staying behind. It turns out that the fox is not that useless and can actually do something. As Shin is playing around with all these undead, Schnee notices a massive blast and approaches it. Shin also notices someone approaching him and realizes that it must be Schnee. He leaves behind the ugly monster and comes across Schnee in a flower garden that spawned out of nowhere. The undead, however, are still following him, but Yazuha forges a barrier and allows them to enjoy some alone time. With this, Schnee rushes towards Shin and hugs him tightly, which startles the poor guy as he has never felt the touch of a woman before. He tells her that he is back home and hugs her as well. Now that their wholesome reunion is over, it's about time they get rid of the monster who is probably feeling lonely because Shin left him behind. Together, Shin and Schnee unleash a massive attack that gets rid of all the undead in the vicinity. Shin then utilizes his sword to finish off the skull-faced lord as well. Before dying, the monster utters some words which shocks Shin, but he ignores them just like you're ignoring your deadlines. Shin was hoping to get some intel from the monster, but failed to figure out anything. After this, Shin suggests that they have a chat since they haven't met after so long. He takes her to a mysterious place and elaborates that after defeating the final boss, he came across a large door in the boss room. Just as he crossed the door, he woke up in a meadow 500 years into the future. Schnee tells him that the support characters made a huge commotion because their masters had disappeared out of nowhere, which made her realize that Shin must have cleared the dungeon. However, one thing that troubled her was the fact that they should have also disappeared alongside the dungeon. Some of them even decided to search for their masters, but owing to the land crust upheaval and the state of confusion among the masses, the support characters went their own ways. After discussing everything in detail, Shin asks Schnee to stop calling him master and use his real name, Shin. Schnee hesitates a bit, but manages to address Shin by his name. Why are they acting like a real couple, though? Anyways, she then questions him regarding his future endeavors as Shin reveals that he wants to investigate the Holy Lands. Schnee then questions if Shin wants to return back to his world, to which he replies positively. This disappoints her a bit, but she keeps her calm. It is also revealed that Schnee remembers everything from their past, and she knew that the support characters would disappear when the game is cleared. Following all this catching up and some useless conversation, Schnee questions Shin regarding Yazuha as he tells her everything about it. It turns out that Yazuha has also leveled up and can even converse with Shin now. He then forbids it to talk in front of other people, but they can still converse via telepathy. Yazuha also hides its tails and makes it look like a normal fox. Schnee gets surprised to know that Shin has managed to tame an Elementail since no one has ever achieved that feat. With this, Shin decides to explain everything to Rashia and Will before they report it to the guild. They somehow manage to catch up to them as well. Meanwhile, the worthless princess investigates the rift created by Shin's sword and even discovers the weapon. The sword is so damn powerful that even a worthless, pathetic loser like her can cause massive damage with it. One of the knights hypothesizes that the sword was forged by a high human named the Ebon Blacksmith.